Hey everybody, you know what it is. This week in Cleantech, around with this week's biggest stories that you need to know about in climate and clean energy. We try to do the show in 15 minutes or less, but today's Friday, February 14th. That means it's Valentine's Day, number one and number two in your hearts. Here for the show, I'm Factor This content director Paul Gerke, not John Engel. This week in Cleantech, four-time guest Tim McDonnell from Semmafor is joining us shortly. Mike, you're laughing over here. What's so funny? Mike Casey from TigerCom on the other side of the screen.
What'd you say, John?
What? I'm inside your star trailer right now, buddy. I'm going to mess this place up. Yeah. No, I'm in a hotel room in Dallas. I'm out supporting our Power Gen event, and I figured it was a little quieter in the room, although I'm sure someone probably wants to kick me out of here sometime soon. So we should probably do what we're supposed to do. Could you tell me about the listeners, Mike?
Absolutely. Hey, we got two new listeners, Charles Ryan, who said, quote, consider your audience one person bigger. Love that, Charles. Thank you. And Josh Rogers, also a new listener. Hey, we are happy to welcome Piper Maeve Engel into the world.
Yes.
Born last
Not
week.
my kid. Congrats, John.
This did not stop John, by the way, from messaging me last night to make sure that we wrapped up the party in a star trailer. And like, dude, I left at 9:30, but I know the police are supposed to show up at 10. Did you? I did not see an instant report with you with a drunken mugshot, so I'm assuming you wrapped it down and sent everybody out by 10.
Of course, and John has been very active on his email despite the big news. So it's very him. Just saying, keeping his thumb on the pulse of clean tech. We got to thank the other listeners too who told us how much they're getting out of these episodes. We always love to hear it from you. Remember, if you want to be part of the show, you can nominate the stories we talk about. REW@clearingevents.com. We'll have a link in the event description as well. All right, let's get into it, Mike. First story of the week.
Our first story is Darna Noor at The Guardian, titled Record-Breaking Growth in Renewable Energy is Threatened by Trump.
So, Mike, this is a new report from CleanView that sort of summarizes a lot of things that we talk about frequently on This Week in Clean Tech, and it's the enormous amount of growth in the United States in that renewable sector. Grew by 47% the previous year, something like 48 gigawatts plus of utility-scale solar, wind, and battery storage, enough to power 3.6 million homes. Now, this is all related to the surge we saw after the Inflation Reduction Act passed. Solar and batteries had the most success in 24. Inflation, interest rates, and supply chain disruptions have slowed growth in recent years, but now we have another thing slowing growth, and that's Trump's pro-fossil fuel agenda. Wondering if it could threaten America's competitive edge that we were starting to establish in that renewable energy market. Mike, your thoughts?
Disclosure here that Michael asked me to review this study before it was published, and I did that yesterday on LinkedIn. I have to say, it's a really cool look, and he is a veteran of This Week in Clean Tech. I think the way to summarize this is that the dotted line extension from this pretty compelling study is that we're going to approach sooner rather than later an inflection point. How durable is the clean energy transition? The ideology over reality crowd, now in charge, seems to be on track to leave no option unrealized to throw the game to the fossil fuel bros. The IRA incentives mostly benefit red states. So 8 Republicans testified against cutting IRA tax credits. And this week, 132 mayors and local officials from 39 states, including 23 that voted for Trump in 2024, wrote to Congress urging them to keep all renewable energy tax credits for state and local governments. I think the best way to say this is you and I will be among the first to find out, my friend.
And we'll be talking about it again on the show and writing about it and all the above, Mike. Our second story, recent guest Alexander C. Kaufman from the HuffPost. It's titled How China Became the World's New Nuclear Energy Superstar. Mike, if you think the fossil fuel bros are bros, tell me what you think about the nuke bros.
And Paul, with that comment, you are now going to be swarmed by a combination of nuclear bros and nuclear bots on your LinkedIn page.
I'm looking forwed to it. I could use the traffic.
And just a note, what really stinks here is that Alex was cut from Huffington Post, or took the buyout because Huffington Post has decided that there is no climate crisis, it would seem, and they're cutting their dedicated climate coverage that Alex has got such subject matter expertise on. It's really a tragedy. But back on track to his story. China's on track to become the world's first, what he calls, electrostate. I like that term. It means a global superpower that is highly dependent not on fossil fuels, but on electricity. And while the U.S. has been wanting to build smaller, mass-produced reactors to cut costs and accelerate the construction of nuclear power plants, China is already there. The country has begun developing its first serialized small modular reactor before U.S. regulators had even approved their own design. And last December, China hooked their first small reactor to the grid. Here's what really caught my eye. China has overtaken France for years, for decades, the world's most enthusiastic nuclear advocate, as the number 2 user of nuclear power, and researchers predict it will surpass the U.S. within a decade, becoming the world's top user. Paul, what did you think?
Well, Mike, we haven't done nuclear in this country in a while, but it's experiencing a bit of a renaissance right now, you might say. The increased demand expectations associated with electrification of everything and trying to create God in the machine and whatever we're doing with data centers, we're going to need the power. China's got a pretty secure electricity rate from industrial buyers to help pay off those multi-billion-dollar investments. Their state does this pretty well, to say the least. U.S. nuclear plants, rather, are sort of bound by the confines of capitalism, right? Like, you've got to make this enormous play where you're talking about tying up, I don't know, $20 billion for 10 years, probably minimum. And there's only like a handful of companies in the whole world that can do that. And those are the ones that are toying with the idea. I mean, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts of the world. The U.S. has messed around with some various reactor designs. The costs are still prohibitive right now. But our aging grid, it doesn't necessarily help with that nuclear growth either. It's harder to connect those new reactors. We can't get anything interconnected in most areas right now. And China, by contrast, has a much more modern grid. They're building to scale so fast, and everything is relatively new, especially in comparison to ours. They're not just ahead of the U.S. right now in nuclear energy. They're ahead in a lot of ways, and they seem to be leading the way in the long haul, Mike.
Yeah. All right, our third story is by Jennifer DeLuey, who is also a This Week in Cleantech alumni guest, plus Jenny Leonard and Josh Wingrove from Bloomberg. Trump sets 25% steel, aluminum tariffs, widening the trade war. Oh boy. Paul,
yeah,
what do you think?
These are tough to keep track of sometimes, Mike, because you're like, wait, is this the one from before, or is this the one enacted? Wait, is this part of that other tariff that this one? Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, including from Canada and Mexico. Those are the U.S. top foreign suppliers of those metals. They take effect March 12. This is the ones we were talking about earlier this month. The U.S. relies heavily on aluminum imports. More than 80% of its aluminum was imported in 2023. Canada, the UAE, and China, its top 3. The Trump administration also considering levies on additional sectors like cars and semiconductors. If this sounds familiar, this isn't the first tariff we've talked about involving Trump. He put a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum back in 2018 during his first time in office. Mike, penny for your thoughts.
In an era of BFDs, this one I think ranks up there. If you guys had just consulted me on your rebrand, I might have suggested you have not factor this, but BFD. That could be good. So, economists are warning that higher tariffs on imported steel and aluminum can raise prices, and this is going to be a particular challenge for clean energy because right now, despite the efforts of our friends at Origami Solar to reframe the industry with recycled steel, most solar panels made in China are framed in aluminum and mounted on trackers and foundations made of steel. Wind turbines require a lot of steel and aluminum as well, so U.S. officials argue that the tariffs are part of a larger plan, including more domestic energy production, which will reduce costs. These efforts to revive domestic steel manufacturing could strengthen energy security over the long term and also ensure clean energy materials are made here in the U.S., but we can't forget that the other folks have a vote through retaliatory tariffs, and there's a lot of disruption ahead. Paul, what's our fourth story?
I like how you just kicked the ball and we're like, I don't want to talk anymore about the disruption. I want to talk about the fourth story. It's from Stanley Reed at the New York Times, entitled Green Energy Ambitions of European Companies Take a Beating. More good news. Mike, what did you think?
Yeah, I don't want to knock the reporting here, which I think was quite good, but I do want to note that this is an example of an overreachy, clicky headline. This is really about Ørsted's problems way more than about the continent's problems. I mean, the EU has a challenge replacing Russian gas because they made an understandable bet that they could bring Russia into the community of nations by buying their energy sources. And a guy named Putin decided he didn't like that bet. So the new CEO of Ørsted has revealed the company is cutting its investment plans by 25%. Ørsted's already abandoned several wind projects off the U.S. East Coast due to delays, inflation, and rising interest rates. The shift follows renewable energy investors Equinor's decision to cut its low-carbon project spending by $10 billion down to $5 billion, citing slower than expected progress in the clean energy transition. All right, Paul, over to you.
Well, everything's just kind of paused right now, and that is actually like maybe relative good news for offshore wind because it's just been so bumpy right from the start. It's just been like a cavalcade of bad news and misfortune kind of since we first put steel in the water. The renegotiating PPAs now, Trump administration telling him there's not going to be any more turbines is another big blow. A lot of companies are just like, we're just not going to touch stuff for the next 4 years. And those companies like Ørsted doing a lot of business in the U.S., they're stock down more than 50% in the last 3 years, and related to, in large part due to the chicanery on our shores. All right, story number 5.
Well, we are welcoming back who the absent John Engel has declared as the leading face on the This Week in Cleantech Mount Rushmore arrangement.
You're looking
Tim
at
McDonnell
it.
with Semmafor. He is, and a handsome visage it is. We welcome him back all the way from Kiev, Ukraine, right where his wife reports to the Washington Post. Tim, welcome. So good to see you again.
Love that.
And
what a way to start.
Yeah, you had a last story. In Semmafor, Trump's unpredictability scares energy investors. Biden's green banker says this is about my friend Jigar Shah. So, Tim, we want people to read the story if they have not yet. What's the big takeaway?
So I mean, I had wanted to have an opportunity to catch up with Jigar now that he's out of government and kind of back doing his thing in podcast. He's back podcasting. He's back talking to clean tech companies in kind of a more conversational and open way than he was able to when he was at Loan Programs Office. And so there was a lot, that I wanted to catch up with about him. And, one of the big thing was, how concerned is he that all of this work that he did in the last 4 years at LPO to get money out the door for, a very wide range of different kind of clean tech projects. Is that money going to be clawed back? They're talking about, what is this department going to look like under the Trump administration? I mean, the last time that Trump was in office, I think LPO they did like a loan for the this nuclear power plant in Georgia, but other than that, I think they did pretty much nothing. And then, of course, it was like super busy under Jigar the last several years. So, I mean, is that money at risk or not? And what was interesting was that, I think Jigar's very confident that loans that have been approved or that are, were kind of given on a conditional basis, if companies do X, Y, and Z things to finalize them, that money will still go out, even though there's been some talk in the new administration about trying to claw some of that money back. I think Jigar's still feeling pretty confident about it. But what his bigger concern was, if you look at the bigger picture, not just what is being talked about at DOE, but everything with, all of the freezing of federal investments, the dismantling of USAID, all of this sort of, actions that the administration is taking to pull back commitments that the U.S. has made, really undermines the confidence that the private sector is going to have in the U.S. as a viable business partner. And if you're trying to scale up, some SAF factory or building new solar, wind, whatever, a battery factory, and you're looking to LPO for support in that process. And by the way, it costs these companies millions and millions of dollars and months or years of their time just to go through the due diligence process with DOE to get this money. So is that an investment that companies are going to make if they think there's a chance that the U.S. is just going to flake at the last minute? And that kind of erosion of confidence, I think, is the thing that's much more worrisome to Jigar. So that's the big concern that he has. Yeah.
Very well spoken, Tim. Do we have time for a question, you think, Mike? Can I pick his brain a little more, or are we already pushing against the window?
Take it. Go,
Take
man.
it. Tim, I'm most curious about that blitz at the very end that we were all writing about that last month or 6 weeks where we're like, we're going to get billions and billions and billions out the door. Did he characterize the way that felt internally? Like, were they pulling all-nighters to try to rush out $100 billion for semiconductor factories?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I've asked him about this, and I asked him about this when I interviewed him while he was still in office too. And I mean, they were working, I think, as hard as they possibly could. And if you know the history of everybody's kind of knows the story of Solyndra during the Obama administration, that was LPO's great catastrophe that kind of screwed up that agency for years, to come. And nobody wants a repeat of Solyndra, so they're trying to be very cautious about the investments that they make. But yeah, they definitely were racing, and I think he's, at least from his point of view, they did as much as they possibly could. There was no way they could move any faster than they did. So I think he's happy to be able to take a little bit of a breather now. Yeah.
I have to do my Pavlovian qualifiers on Solyndra, since sounding like I was like Lord Elrod. I was there 3,000 years ago when the thing was forged. It is worth noting. That after 3 congressional hearings, thousands of hours of bloviating on Fox News, and $800 million in super PAC spending against Obama on Solyndra, not a single person ever spent a minute in front of a judge. No one went to jail. Oh, and by the way, the program returned $30 million net positive with a 94.6% success rate.
Right.
That very year. So, I'm sorry to the fossil fuel bros. We will oil our windmill with your tears. Let's go to Cleantecher of the week, Paul Gerke.
Is it Cleantech or is it Cleantech Leader of the Week? Can we keep it Cleantecher,
dude?
Well, the script says it's been saying different things. It's Cleantecher of the Week. I like that better anyway. Peter Roy, or Peter Waugh, is he related to the goaltender? International consultant for Soluz Honduras. Peter recently took a trip to Honduras to witness the company's operations in Yoro, where solar energy was brought to a remote off-grid community that used to rely on wood sap for light. You ever use wood sap for light, Mike? No, not back when you were forging those rings. Thank you, Peter, for sharing the story. Not Peter Jackson, Peter Waugh. About Honduras and the Let's Share the Sun Foundation, providing electricity for that community. Love those off-grid stories, bringing totally renewables out to those communities. Very cool stuff.
Well, we want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and our help from Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for their help in gathering these stories.
And Tim McDonnell, as always, great to hear from you, and can't wait to check that story out. Thank you for checking out This Week in Clean Tech. Subscribe, give feedback, send Mike your hate mail. I'm probably not going to check it. I'm flying home from Dallas in Power Gen. We'll see you guys next week. Read all the articles discussed below, right here in the article as well.
And he's Paul, not John.
Yeah.
All right.
Next week you can call me John again. It'll be funny. We'll keep laughing about it. It's cool.
Later, Tim. Stay safe out there. Take care.
Cheers, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you.